Now, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Brenda Strafford Centre on Aging. We are a university academic center that lives under the umbrella of the O'Brien Institute for Public Health in the Cummings School of Medicine. While saying that, we are truly interdisciplinary, and we are designed to represent faculties of nursing, social work, kinesiology, and the other faculties in our university, as well as the Cummings School of Medicine. Our overarching aim is to enhance older adults' lives by promoting interdisciplinary research and education, engaging in a wider community dialogue, including involving older adults themselves clearly, and informing public policy so it's wise and serves the needs of our aging population. Last night, we were fortunate to hear Dr. Janine Wiles, an international expert in aging populations, speak about what we can learn about resilience from older adults themselves. Dr. Wiles is here again today, and you'll hear from her later. Today, we're also fortunate to have another international expert on aging in our midst. Our keynote speaker this morning is Dr. Andrew Wister. Dr. Wister is currently director of the Gerontology Research Centre at Simon Fraser University and university professor in the Department of Gerontology, where he spearheaded the development of the Masters of Gerontology and PhD in Gerontology programs. He's an internationally recognized expert on aging issues, policies, research and training, and has also been active in the Canadian Association of Gerontology, receiving the Distinguished Member Award in 2014. Dr. Wister is also the chair of the National Seniors Council of Canada. As the lead on the Simon Fraser University data collection site and computer-assisted telephone interview site, Dr. Wister is part of the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. Dr. Wister has written over 75 highly cited peer-reviewed articles, 12 books, and monographs and numerous chapters, reports, and other publications on baby boomer health dynamics, population aging, and population health, environmental adaptation among older adults, patterns of family and informal caregiving, social support, health promotion, statistical methods, and life course trends and transitions. Join me in welcoming Dr. Wister for his presentation titled Resilience in the Face of Multimorbidity, While Some Individuals Adapt to Adversity Better Than Others. Andrew.
Welcome and good morning, everyone. I think I gave the wrong bio. I meant the short one. I cannot live up to that. That was the short, and I don't even think that's true. In any event, I want to thank Alice for her prayer and sharing her wisdom, and of course the wonderful song. I also want to thank David Hogan and the organizing committee for this very exciting conference on resilience and aging, people, places, and policies. I'd like to take you on a little journey, exploring resilience applied to multimorbidity. And in doing so, I hope to answer what I think is a really important question, and that is why some people are able to recover and bounce back from adversity better than others, even in the face of multimorbidity. I know you're all well versed in aging and aging issues and population aging, but if you'll bear with me, I love age structures. I love these figures. And here we see one in which we have two superimposed age structures. The red line is 1871 Canada, and then the blue is the most recent census data, 2016. Up the middle is age, males and females on the sides, cohort on the outside edge, and size of the cohort along the bottom. And what you'll see is that we've moved from basically a pyramid with lots of young people and not many old people to a rectangularization. And in the sort of top level of that rectangularization is this big bulge. A lot of you people. The baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1965, 1/3 of the Canadian population, over 10 million people. That's scary. And that bulge, metaphorically, is called the pig in the python. The pig in the python. I think you have to turn your head sideways to get the full effect. But that pig is moving up that age escalator, and people born in 1946 are now 70 to 71 years of age. Wow. So the fastest growing older age group right now is 65 to 70, 71. But what's interesting is there's another phenomenon taking place. People are living longer. Thus, the second fastest growing age group is actually centenarians. In between 2011 and 2016, number of centenarians increased 40%, from about 5,800 people to 8,300 people in Canada. Now, that may not seem like a lot of people, but it shows that we're all living longer. So we have more people 80s, more people nonagenarians in their 90s and above. And for my talk, what that means, and for this conference, what this means, is that we're undergoing pretty rapid, very rapid population aging right now that's going to escalate. So between 2011 and 2016, the percentage of people 65 and over rose from 14.8 to 16.9, almost 17%. It's now over 17%. And it'll rise to about 24 or 25% when the full effect of the baby boomers takes effect. So, do we want to have a population that's older and healthier, or the reverse? Now, a simple definition of resilience, a basic definition, is the ability to rebound from adversity. And Janine Wiles last night gave us a wonderful talk in which she really elaborated on all the different dimensions of resilience. And I'm very interested in the applications of resilience to multimorbidity, the ability to rebound from illness adversity. Now, we have to drill down a little deeper as well today, and I'll get to that. But to start, I think we need to define what multimorbidity means. It sounds like it's a big word, and I think it has a lot of complexity to it. Simply, it's having multiple concurrent illnesses, chronic illnesses, that are slow in progression, long in duration, and episodic. So they're not always the same. They're also synergetic. That means that if you have several chronic illnesses, the effects are more than the sum of the parts. I think that makes it very important for us to look at multimorbidity, and it can have many effects on our lives. Episodic pain, loss of function, loss of independence, and even mortality. At the social psychological level, multimorbidity can affect stress, our feelings of stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, self-esteem, social isolation, and even social roles. So this multimorbidity is very important. Well, how many people have multimorbidity? Well, prevalence rates suggest that between about 62 and 82% of older adults, this is US data, have at least 2 or more of the 15 most prevalent chronic illnesses. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, asthma, arthritis, COPD, etc. And I've done some work in which I found that these prevalence rates are similar for both Canada and Australia. And I'm not going to get into all of that research, that's another talk. But these prevalence rates are consistent with what we see here. Now, how do we measure multimorbidity? I think that's a good starting point before we get to resilience. And like I said, it's complicated. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of a busy table. A colleague of David and mine, Lauren Griffith, has used the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging, and I'll describe that in a bit more detail, but I think you've heard of it. Very large longitudinal study in Canada of over 51,000 people. And you can see in the second column a list of 27 chronic illnesses that are in that study, 27. And we can see that there's along the top, different ways of selecting those chronic illnesses. So for example, Fortin selects ones from all of the major disease categories. whereas others focus on symptoms and other elements, risk factors, and so on and so forth. Now, in survey data, you obviously don't have quite as much detail as with clinical data. Regardless, depending on the measure you're using, we're looking at anywhere between 30 or 40 and 70% on prevalence rates. I've looked at a lot of different studies. I would say, if you want a ballpark, about 2 out of 3 people 65 and over have multimorbidity in Canada. So if we were going to use multimorbidity to examine various outcomes, I think that we have to go beyond, a simple prevalence rate. And I've done some work where I've examined some different measures of multimorbidity. And I'd just like to share with you, just for a moment, those findings, because I think they are relevant to our discussion. I used the Canadian Community Health Survey and looked at people 65 and over. That was the healthy aging one. And I looked at actually 6 different measures, but I'm just going to show you 3 of them. And I examined the correlations, along with my co-authors, with life satisfaction, perceived health, health professional visits, and medication use, because these are really important outcomes. And the first one in the first column is simply a dichotomy. If you have 0 or 1 chronic conditions compared to 2 or more. And the correlations are modest, as you can see, with life satisfaction, 0.14, et cetera, down to 0.40 for medication use. Now, if we add up the total number of illnesses that people have, and in this case we had 19 possibilities, of the major ones included, we see that there's an increase in those correlations. And then but we can also weight, because if we add them all up, we're giving them equal value, but we can weight them. And one way to weight them is to weight them using key measures like functional status. Probably the best known is the ADL score from the ORS study, the Duke ORS study. And that's what we used. But we see that there's only a very slight increase in those predictions, weighting them. I also weighted with the HUI Health Utility Index. It's like the SF26 and 36. It's a very broad-based health measure, and not much improvement. So overall, I think we can use these additive scales in a pretty robust way. But it's sometimes difficult to get proper diagnosis of multimorbidity. So we're always facing that. So in this case, this gentleman seems to have a problem. Perhaps it may go overlooked. So whenever we're using self-reports, there's going to be some measurement error. But overall, I think we're going to be able to deal with things. So that brings me to this key question. Why are some people living well in the face of this multimorbidity that's experienced by 2 out of 3 people 65 and over? Is it past experience? Have they learned something throughout their lives, perhaps going through an experience when they were younger? Perhaps a residential school experience maybe actually made them stronger in some ways. Maybe going through illnesses. Is it some sort of innate ability or a trait, a genetic trait, an attitude or a belief? Some people have this really strong, positive attitude about life, others not. A belief, like a spiritual belief. Some people are highly spiritual, and that gives them some strength, inner strength, to deal with adversity. Cultural capital. We know that there's differences in different ethno-cultural groups. I know that Janine shared with us some interesting work on the Maori and other groups, Aboriginal groups with very strong social and cultural capital. Physical strength. Some people seem to just be able to endure things better than others. And personal resources. More money, more access to other kinds of resources, social support. So it's multifaceted. But why multimorbidity? Why am I looking at those resilience factors connected to multimorbidity? I think because multimorbidity is very interesting, because it really places people in a situation of adversity. And if we have a group that's in this situation, then we can really look at how resilience affects those outcomes. Now, a simple way of looking at resilience over the life course might be with these two competing hypotheses. The one in the orange in the background, that's a U-shaped curve, represents physiological and psychological resilience hypothesis. In other words, when people are very young and children, they're obviously don't have very high resilience because they're just little. They're babies, they're children, they're prone to illness. But that strengthens. And then, of course, there's some wavering, some variability in middle ages, ups and downs, but then it declines. It declines in older age, 75, 80, 85 plus, and quite rapidly, according to some. Another hypothesis gives a very different trajectory, one that starts low but builds continuously over time and can be called a social learning hypothesis of resilience. Thus, we see people can learn from the earlier experiences they have and actually get better at dealing with adversity. But these are very simple hypotheses, and we certainly need to build stronger models and understand this area to a greater degree. So I've been working with some colleagues on a life course model of multi-morbidity resilience that was recently published. We looked at 120 articles that covered the area of resilience, successful living, living well, aging well, chronic illness, and aging. And from that, we found, again, that this resilience is a multifaceted kind of component, as I was referring to earlier, covering physical and functional elements, certainly psychological, emotional, spiritual, economic, cultural, and social and ecological. So I've sort of mentioned that, but it's worth going over again, that these are the components that really came out of all of this knowledge base. Now, with respect to resilience thinking, it's been around a long time. This isn't brand new, but I think it's a very hot area that's emerging certainly in aging. And if we look back in time, during sort of the 50s to the 70s, there was, first of all, a lot of work on individual risk and protective factors. This was mainly done by child psychologists examining the mental health of children and how they can how they're resilient or not resilient, and what contributes to that. From the 70s, we see a lot of emphasis put on multi-level bridging of traits and processes. So it's a little getting at the connections between those, moving into coping processes, and with the coping processes, a lot of work in the kind of stress area, especially the importance of the buffering effect of social support on stress. This led in the 2000s into interventions that have been done. And finally, I think the fifth wave, and the four, I think, are discussed by Marsden's work, but this fifth one I've added, and this is the specification of resilience to different areas. And that's what we're doing in this conference. We're specifying resilience in different contexts, people, places, policies, and in this case, multimorbidity. So from a theoretical and epistemological lens, certainly we see that developmental psychology was there first and added a lot, and I've mentioned it already. But person-environment theory, and I know Janine talked about person-environment theory last night, Lawton's model, it really emphasizes the importance of balance between one's competence, their individual competence, and the environmental demands or press that are placed on the individual. And so quite often it's used to make the case for changing the physical environment to match people's competence level, whether it be through technical devices, different housing, et cetera, and even social. The social ecological model pushes that forward because it emphasizes the link between the micro, the individual, and the macro, the structural, with the meso, the linking part, which can also include policy. Intersectionality is a fairly new approach that really focuses on vulnerability. So the vulnerability of individuals based on their life experiences and their who they are. So there's different levels of vulnerability. If you're a woman, if you're an older woman, widowed, a certain ethno-cultural group, maybe your socioeconomic situation, and you have to peel back these layers and see how they interrelate with one another. Finally, life course theory, I think, is very important because life course theory emphasizes the importance of earlier life experiences on later life experiences. And it also stresses how people have agency. Agency means that we are able to shape the worlds around us. So we're not passive. We're not just the result of what's happening, but we can affect change proactively. So here's this life course model of multi-morbidity resilience. I mean, it's really in its early inception, so I know you're going to ask me later that I've left things out, and you're going to critique it, and that's all fine. But if you start at the left-hand corner, we see kind of these three circles that are all connected to one another, representing wellness, recovery, and growth. That's where we want to be. But due to adverse life events, in this case multi-morbidity, and the perception of the stress associated with it, and perception is so important, as well as the experience of it, we see that there can be a disruption of wellness, recovery, and growth. Through energy, motivation, access, we try to activate various resources. These resources are embedded within our environments, our families, ourselves. They can be individual, social, environmental resources. We must harness those to move back towards wellness. Through coping processes and emotional regulation, you see this reintegration on this left-hand side, and finally back to some kind of wellness, recovery, and growth. But this is a dynamic, always changing situation, and thus we have a line along the bottom representing the life course. I think there's still a major research gap in theory, so we have to do more work in models and in research that explicates the complexity of resilience types, processes, and determinants specific to the occurrence of chronic illness and disability. So that brings me to the main analyses I want to share with you today. It's examining multimorbidity, but I want to explicate the role of lifestyle behaviors. I've spent a career interested in healthy lifestyles and aging. And so it made sense for me to look at this as a first step. But there's all kinds of work that can be done in this resilience area. So what I thought we might want to be able to do here is to build some resilience indices and then look at determinants of those with a focus on lifestyle factors among older people. Now, we all know that lifestyle is important. Here's a connection between different lifestyle factors and chronic illnesses. They're not all there, the chronic illnesses, but many. Smoking has an effect on a number of them, unhealthy eating, physical activity, obesity, and they actually affect some of the same ones, so there's these synergies going on. And so if you can affect positive change in one area of lifestyle behavior, you can really affect many different chronic illnesses. And there's other healthy lifestyles that we need to include here. I haven't included sleep. There's a lot of work recently in sleep that I'm going to talk about. Also, oral health, stress. There's a long list of these, but these are some of the main ones. But it's not easy, to engage in healthy lifestyles, is it? Like this gentleman here, he's, I think he's just in the pre-contemplation, maybe contemplation. He's thought about the sweatpants, but hasn't quite got there. And just to be gender equal here, having what's called a healthy body weight isn't always easy as well. And I don't know. I guess some of us would like to change our DNA. But maybe that's a little futuristic. So the data that I'm going to be using to do this analysis that I'm sharing with you is from the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging. You've probably heard of it. It's the largest longitudinal panel study in Canada, over 51,000 people. Wow. We start with people 45 to 85, and we're going to follow them for 20 years. We're doing that already. I'm going to share with you baseline data. In July, we'll have finished the first follow-up and start the second follow-up. So the longitudinal data will be available in a year and a half, maybe 2 years. 2 years, I don't know. There's two main cohorts, a tracking cohort, 20,000 who get a telephone survey, and then a comprehensive of over 31,000 who get a face-to-face interview like the survey, the telephone survey, but also like a 3-hour set of physiological measures, blood, urine, bone density scan, all kinds of eye tests, ear tests, balance, gait, everything you can think of. Those are the data I'm using. There's comprehensive sites there's 11 sites in 7 provinces. One of them is here, University of Calgary, under David Hogan. I have one at SFU as well as a telephone site. So we're also able to do data linkage and all kinds of other work and hopefully some qualitative triangulation research. So there's lots of opportunity here, and I think we're just starting off and scratching the surface. I have one of the catalysts, the CIHR Catalyst grants, and I know people here also have those, and that's a way to get going on these data, on these very exciting data with millions of data points. So I'm using people 65 and over from that comprehensive cohort who have 2 or more chronic illnesses out of the 27. And the reason why I'm just using the simple 2 or more, that's typically what you do when you're selecting a target population, because I only want to look at people who are multimorbid. Some use 3 or more, most 2 or more. I'm using 2 or more. That's 6,771 people out of the sample, age 73 on average, 57% women. Based on the examination of literature, I came up with some domains with my co-authors: functional, social, and psychological. There are other domains. We talked about them: spiritual, cultural, etc. But these are the 3 big ones that came out, and this is a starting point. So I just mentioned those, so I'll move through those quickly. Functional resilience. I think functional resilience is fundamental to aging as it relates to the ability of multimorbid individuals to complete tasks of daily living, social roles, to remain active. It's certainly a key aspect of the disablement process that's linked to being the experience of disability, and that can increase vulnerability, limit daily activities, affect social engagement, etc. We have social resilience, which I think supports the maintenance of positive social interaction, including community participation, protecting against loneliness, very important, and social isolation. When I was chair of the National Seniors Council, and I stepped down in June, by the way, getting a new chair, I finished my term, yay. We did 3 reports on social isolation. I went all across the country talking to all kinds of community people, seniors, academics about social isolation, loneliness, and I'm telling you, that's a whole nother talk, but very important area. And we're going to be using the CLSA to examine that particular area. So certainly the successful activation of social resilience entails harnessing available resources, especially social support networks. Psychological resilience pertains to the ability to mentally cope with the stressors that are often associated with adverse effects, in this case multimorbidity. And the degree to which individuals, they perceive that stress, experience depression, and maintain psychological well-being remain or represent very key aspects of this domain. It draws from stress theory and cognitive appraisal theory, the work of Cohen and others, where stressfulness and challenges in old age due to episodic pain, disability, etc., can really disrupt one's own self-concept. And that's what I was talking about with that life course model of multimorbidity resilience. And can lead to also healthcare decisions, either positive or negative. So there's these 3 indices. So we're using the CLSA data, and so I'm limited to what's there. And I decided, along with my co-authors, to select 3 measures for this index. It's like creating a frailty index, right? That's the analogy. The ORS IADLs, that's the Instrumental Activities of Daily Living famous scale, picking up on things like shopping, driving, etc. Their Activities of Daily Living scale, which covers things like bathing and feeding, and the Gerlach Summary Performance Score, which is a balance gait, the get up and go, so it's a very good physiological established measure. We split each one of those at the mean, added them up for a score between 0 and 3. So split at the mean and added them up. Social resilience, we used the famous MOS social support scale. It covers emotional support, tangible support, positive social interaction, and affective support, so quite comprehensive. And then a scale where we added up participation in various community groups. It could be fraternities, church, senior centers, and finally a single item that was all that was there on loneliness, given the importance of loneliness. Split them at the mean, median for loneliness, added them up. And then for psychological resilience, we used the Kessler's psychological distress scale, a famous scale for distress, the Diener satisfaction life scale, life satisfaction, well-being, and the famous CESD depression scale. Split them at the mean, added them to 0 and 3. So we have 3 domains we're looking at, and then a total, one where we just sort of add them all together. Okay, now you have to bear with me. I've got some tables and some numbers, but I'm going to walk you through them. Don't worry, if those who hate tables. I hate tables too, but they're a necessary evil sometimes. So, first of all, how are the domains interrelated to one another? And I know Janine was talking about this last night, and I think there was questions by David and others saying, well, this is only 3 domains, functional, social, and psychological domains of multi-morbidity resilience, but how do they interrelate with one another? Well, social and functional, 0.14, so they're pretty small, a little stronger for psychological and functional. Social and psychological more strongly associated, almost 0.40. And then they show different associations with total resilience, but each one is a component part, so we got to watch out for that. But certainly, it looks like psychological resilience really relates to that total one more than the others. But my thinking, are people who are functionally resilient then going to be socially resilient? Are they also going to be psychologically resilient? Is it like there's resilient people and not resilient people? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Those are fairly low. I think there's a lot of uniqueness here going on. So to take a stab at this, I want to look at some models and see what happens here in terms of predictive models. And so these are the variables that we're looking at. The interval ones are age. We want to look at age, even though it's 65 and over. Individual age is important because there's younger and older people. Number of friends, of course, number of relatives, and number of medications to pick up on the illness context. Gender, and as a very key component, education and income as resources, marital status. I think marital status is kind of like a social support component. And immigration status, housing problems, another SES factor, I think, urban-rural status. And then we have the lifestyle factors, body mass index, inactivity, alcohol consumption, smoking, sleep, appetite, skipped meals. Health status and pain relate to the illness context, which we want to at least control for. So let's look at functional resilience. What are the main predictors of functional resilience? Age. So being younger, older adult, versus an older adult gives one. You're going to be better. You have higher resilience. So the older ones, less resilience, thus the negative minus sign. Being female. Being female, and we're controlling for all those variables, so the independent effect of female is pretty strong. And so being female, you're more resilient. What's going on there? I think some people alluded to that earlier. It's there. It's always there. Everywhere. BMI. So if you're overweight or obese, especially obese, it puts you at a disadvantage with respect to functional resilience. And perceived health, very strong. Perceived health is always in there. Is it an attitude about your health? Partly. Is it reflective of your overall health? Probably. And then the ones I listed at the bottom, because I had them all on the table, and then the table was one of these really tiny tables and you couldn't read it. So there's a few other weaker associations below 0.10. So they're still statistically significant, not due to chance, but they're below 0.10 strength in their beta coefficients. Their betas is their independent effect. Pain, more pain, less resilience, it's negative. Smoking, negative on your resilience. And sleep, more sleep, positive resilience. As one might expect, but it's interesting that some of these come up, like sleep and appetite. What about social resilience? Marital status, being married or partnered, includes partnered of any kind, has a positive effect on resilience. Having more friends for social resilience, that makes sense. Appetite is there and perceived health, but also a little smaller association, but they're there. They're still substantively important. Younger age, being female, and then smoking, negative effect. What about psychological resilience? Wow, sleep is really important. Sleep is very important for resilience. Appetite, extremely important, perceived health. As well, being female, weaker but substantively important. Higher income, more resilient, more friends, relatives. Housing problems. Housing problems is not good for resilience. Pain, not good. And a small effect for physical activity, but physical activity is not as strong as one might think here for whatever reason. The explained variance, how we usually say, is this, do we have the right variables to explain what we're looking at? The explained variance for these three domains range between about 17% up to 30%. So pretty good. Then what about total resilience? Well, again, younger age, being married, sleep. Again, appetite, perceived health. And then at the bottom, weaker ones, but still important, being female, number of friends, the obesity, and the smoking factor. Interesting. So overall, we're seeing that lifestyle, we're getting the BMI in there. We want to be lower BMI. We don't want to be obese. Overweight, I know there's research that there's a bit of a protective factor of being overweight at the advanced ages because we lose weight, when you're over 80. So so keep your weight really good. And then when you're 75, eat like crazy. Better sleep, better appetite, fewer skip meals, not smoking, less activity. Okay, and you're saying, well, I know these. I don't know. I don't know if you know how important these are all the time because people know it and they're not doing it. So do it. That's what my yoga instructor says. If you can do it, do it. And then being female, a younger senior, married and more friends, and housing problems. That rings a bell again. Those are also important and that are the non-lifestyle factors. And then perceived health and pain. Pain pops up too. You're in pain and that can even interfere with some of these other activities. So the next thing you're saying is, well, you've just looked at people with 2 or more chronic illnesses. Who knows what those are? They can be all over the place. And what about specific kinds of maybe clustering of certain illnesses? Like having maybe heart disease and diabetes, the vascular ones, or maybe the osteo ones, when the funky knee and the funny knee, and some osteoarthritis and some other. So I looked at the literature with my colleagues, and we found that based on most of the work from Australia, US, and Germany, that based on various kinds of factor analyses, they identified some key clusters that through factor analysis, and who cares what that is, basically that there's clustering. There's clustering of these things, right? And this clustering suggests that there's certain chronic illnesses that hang together with respect to their impact on people's lives, functional status, healthcare utilization, etc. These are the 3 that we found that we're going to examine here quickly are osteocluster, so osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, lung disease, chronic pain in the back, or back pain problems. The metabolic or vascular cluster, which is diabetes, hypertension, and or heart disease. And the mental health cluster. Anxiety disorder, mood disorder, thyroid, migraine headaches. So if people have 2 or more of any one of those clusters, and they can have other illnesses as well, but 2 or more of any cluster, they're in that cluster. So our numbers go down a bit, but let's start with the osteo cluster. It's still decent, we still have almost 2,400 people there, so we can run these kinds of regressions with, I think, a fair degree of robustness, as they say. I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. And here we're getting some again, sort of the same kind of characters, the same cast of characters coming up. Younger age, well, there's always an aging effect in there. Control for everything is always an aging effect. I don't know what that is. Aging. Marital status. Also being partnered of any kind, having that intimate connection. Resilient. More friends. Not the relatives. I don't know why. Maybe that is. But you know why? You know what that is? Well, relatives are good. But there's some good relatives, and then there's a couple, and then I think they kind of cancel out the good ones. So if we get rid of those bad relatives, then it's the relatives. It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. So relatives aren't all bad. So don't go after me on that. My closest person in my life is my sister. I know. I got a really close brother, and then I got a sister who hates me. Sleep. Again, sleep. Goodness gracious. Janine, how did you do that talk coming all the way from Auckland? Hardly any sleep. Sleep is important. Appetite. Having a good appetite, and then not skipping meals, and perceived health. But also, on the weaker side here, we found under the osteo, being female again. Goodness, you guys have an advantage on so many things and disadvantages on others. But higher income, housing problems is bad again. These are weaker associations, but they're substantively important. Obesity, smoking, and pain. Now, I just have two more, and then I'm going to pull this together. For the vascular. Vascular, it's kind of interesting. And by the way, all these are the R squared, the variance explained is like 30% on all of these. That's quite good. It means that we really have a lot of key predictors here. And age, income, better income, that's a resource that's useful. Marital status again. And then sleep, appetite, very important. Perceived health, of course, that attitude and reflective of controlling for the other elements of your health. And pain for vascular. That can be problematic. Also, being female to a lesser extent, number of friends, housing problems, obesity, and smoking. Same cast of characters. And then finally, the mental health cluster. Here we see something a little different. Again, age is there. I'm not sure if you can read it that clearly. It got a little small. That's why I took out some of the variables. Education. Education is there. Higher education, you're more resilient for the mental health. I have no idea what that means. But there's something there maybe about knowledge of how to deal with it, maybe more likely to seek counseling and supports and so on. Or just being able to deal with it. Being careful what you read on the internet. Household income. Housing problems. So the socioeconomic and resource area under the finance is very important. Inactivity. So here's where physical activity really helps your mental health. Resilience for people who have this cluster. And then sleep, skip meals, perceived health. Smaller effects for being female. The positive effect is being female, you're more resilient to mental health, believe it or not. I know higher rates of depression, but for this is what we're finding. Marital status, positive, have more friends and relatives, and then pain is a negative. So, here are the key resilience ones again. It's the same cast of characters that are coming up, but inactivities come in there, physical activity where it wasn't before. Being female, younger seniors, married, more friends, fewer housing problems, higher income and education, and perceived health and pain. So while these three domains were not that highly intercorrelated with one another when we looked at the first stuff, a lot of the predictors seem to, there's some nuances, but sort of the same cast keeps coming up. And that's interesting. And then even with the clusters, there's some nuances, but there's also a lot of similarity. I think that's rather interesting. But even when we do good things, there can be some negative outcomes, and we have to be careful. Not all health behavior is good, and sometimes if you do have osteoarthritis and you go out and try to run, training for the marathon, you can overdo it. And in this case, maybe didn't chew his food as well as he should have. But to final thoughts. Final thoughts. I've got a few minutes, right? Final thoughts. This is. I'm just scratching the surface with these data, these are papers that are just. I'm just putting them together now, and there's lots of room for other work. CLSA data are a minefield of a wealth of data, and I encourage people to gain access. You talk to Ann and David here about how to do so. Go to the website. Fantastic data. But this is a starting point. I think we need multi-method studies. I think we need to triangulate some of the more, the experiential, qualitative, ethnographic, contextual kinds of stuff with this kind of stuff and bring them together, because each has something to offer. But without the other, I think that the sum is more than the parts. Let's put it that way. We need better measures than some of the kind of resilience scales that often ask things like, how well have you bounced back from adversity? That's okay, but I think we need some other measures as well. In this case, and with the indices that I've created, that's a stepping stone. But they can be, there's other things that can be added. I think longitudinal data is necessary. I've used panel data. So in order to disentangle possible reciprocal effects, is it these things affecting resilience, or is it bidirectional? Probably both. The longitudinal data that's going to be around in just a couple of years in the CLSA will allow us to do that. I think we need to connect resilience at not only the individual level, but the family level. I mean, people share the same food in the refrigerator, right? We need to also look at communities and the larger environment and the policy arena. Janine talked about age-friendly communities last night, for example. And what we're doing is we're now going into a second phase of this research where we're using geographic information system modeling. So we're able to use the postal codes in the CLSA. Don't worry, if you're a CLSA participant, we can't find you. We just get the front stations, the first 3 parts of the postal code. And we're going to map these different multi-morbidity resilience domains by region. And that'll be interesting. And see where the pockets are of resilience at more of a socio-environmental level. And then link those with other data. But there still remain a lot of gaps. We need to really fill these gaps in how individual families, communities adapt to adversity, not just multi-morbidity resilience. There's all kinds of resiliency and vulnerability. Look at different groups. Look at people who are maybe members of a particular ethnocultural community, an Asian community, Aboriginal community, LGBT community. I think that there's really a void here in terms of illness prevention, care management, self-care coping, healthcare systems, integrated care models. We really have to move forward in those areas. And I think this resilience thinking does help us to think about how to address these issues, and perhaps with a different angle, a slightly different angle. And that's because most research, I think, especially in multimorbidity, has focused on the pathogenic components of illness. All those negative things, the disablement, pain, and I think we need to flip that around a little bit. Not forget about it, because those are extremely important and they're relevant, as we saw in these analyses, but also focus on the salogenic, positive kinds of elements that can strengthen us and allow us to bounce back from adversity. So as we look into the future, with all of this population aging, multimorbidity, there's increased multimorbidity, probably partly because we have a pretty good healthcare system and we're able to identify chronic illnesses earlier in life and treat them better than ever. People's health trajectories are better than they've ever been. We still have a ways to go, but given that, given population aging, what do we want? Do we want to make choices that aren't going to be supportive to our resilience and our health in general? Or do we want to have a more positive approach? And I hope that we do the latter. Otherwise, we're going to be in real trouble when we really have this accelerated population aging and society lags behind. And I don't think we can just solve everything with more money being poured into the healthcare system. Do that, but we as individuals, families, communities, members of multiple communities must step up to the plate. So thank you very much. Thank you, organizers, my co-authors, and the audience. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now we have some time for questions. Just before we start, I think the metaphor you were searching for, Andrew, was that the CLSA is a gold mine of data, not a minefield of data.
Oh, did I say minefield?
The metaphor is quite different.
It's only a minefield when I'm doing analyses of this type. Thank you. I knew I'd make a mistake on that.
Okay. While we're waiting for people to come up to the microphone, I'll just ask a couple of questions, just to get things started. And I know you're well aware of this, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about the associations. And associations does not necessarily mean we know the direction of any relationship. Like, does poor sleep drive decreased resiliency, or if you're less psychologically resilient, do you sleep less well as a consequence? I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
So just to understand, you're asking about the domains?
What's driving what?
What's driving what?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really key question, and that's why, just to be defensive for 1 second, I think we do need longitudinal data to be able to tease that out. But I think that there's such strong theory and literature showing, for example, how important lifestyles are, or marital status, or social support networks, effective pain, et cetera, on resilience, on multi-morbidity resilience, that I think we're in the right direction. I think these things are moving in the right direction, in the correct direction in terms of our interpretation. But I don't, nothing is one way, nothing is linear, okay? And if we just think linearly, we're gonna make mistakes. These things are likely very complex, they're bidirectional, but in order to at least drill into the complexity, we have to start somewhere, so we make some assumptions. And in this case, I think that there's probably fairly good rationale for why things like healthy lifestyles are gonna make people more resilient with respect to their illness. Now, of course, we know that when you, let's say, have really severe pain and osteoarthritis, you can't go out and run to the extent that you used to. So there's definitely something going on there. And that's why I think we have to tease out those nuances. And the qualitative work, I think, can be really, really important for contextualizing those kinds of complicated associations.
So just another one. It seemed that a number of the factors are assets or strengths, and some are deficits or negatives. And if you had to kind of think about the balance between the positives and negatives, should we be maximizing the positives or minimizing the negatives?
Jeez. Thanks, David. Boy, this is my colleague from CLSA. He's asking me like the hardest questions. All right, I'll have a drink of water. I can answer this one. Oh, how long do we have? I'm a professor. I'm used to, like, you ask a question, it's like I should have an hour to answer. If I don't have an hour, I can't answer it properly. Yeah, which ones do we focus on? That's great. I think both. There, that's my answer. Now, I've devoted a career to the importance of the healthy behaviors and engaging in these things and starting early in life, because you build up these health credits. And these health credits can be cashed in when you're old. So don't wait till you're old, except for that eating thing, to make up for it. Except that's the one exception. But the healthy, and to invest, to be proactive, to do that yourself builds up self-esteem and a sense of confidence, efficacy, connectedness. I mean, I think it's huge. But to reduce the negatives, there's some that you can and some that you can't. I think that, and these are interrelated. I mean, if you're able to engage in healthier lifestyles, you're probably able to deal with your pain better. That's what the arthritis self-management does. More control, they get you to walk a little, understand it. So I think that you need to do both. There's some of the negatives, I'm sorry to say, that we really need to do better on. Housing problems, poverty, better education for more people. I mean, these are systemic problems of our society, other societies. Sure, Canada's doing great, but we can do better in a lot of these areas. Same with healthcare, and I can go on about that. But listen, we're undergoing really, really rapid population aging. I don't think a lot of people understand how fast it's happening. And when you see in one census going from 15 to 17% of people 65 and over, and then see how many people are becoming in the 90s and hundreds, all of our life expectancy predictions are underestimates as long as mortality continues to drop, which it is. No, we're not going to live to 150. That won't change the lifespan, but there's more and more of us, there's more and more people, there's more and more chronic illnesses. We have to certainly address this. And so, can we change poverty levels? Yeah, they were all-time low in the 90s and they've creeped up again. We got to do something about that.
Thanks so much for the talk. That was a great answer to an hour-long answer. This is one of those non-questions that goes into an ellipsis at the end. I think you just sort of fill in the parts. You paused, and there was some laughter over the importance of friends versus relatives. And I was wondering, there's the beginning, and then here comes the ellipsis at the end. Chosen kin versus blood kin. This is something that we need to look at through the alternative qualitative measures, or do you want to make a big statement about how it's just a social network? It doesn't matter whether you're blood related, you're non-blood related, or what's going on in there? ...
Yeah. Great question. First of all,
no question mark.
First of all, I just want to emphasize again that marital status, being partnered, whether you're married or not, came up as probably one of the most consistent factors. So that having an intimate bond of that level is extremely important in, I think, protecting one to various vulnerabilities that occur with aging and promotes resilience. With respect to friends, to blood kin versus other kin, I mean, you hear about fictive kin, right? Fictive kin is the notion that you can have really close relationships with somebody who you're not related to by blood or marriage, but you feel like they're your really, really close person, significant other. And that's certainly true, but blood is thicker than water. And the interesting thing is, I don't think you can look at social networks and count up the social networks and say, okay, this person has a larger social network and more dense, without getting at the relationship qualities. And like I said before, I know, you look at some really interesting work on inheritance now that shows that there's tremendous amount of family conflict around the time of the death of a parent among those siblings. And that's, it's phenomenal what happens there, over sometimes what are seemingly, from an outsider, something that's not that important, that bracelet, but people have attachment and then it can get involved. Interestingly, I know also in the family literature, they talk about how these relationships change over time. And some people who weren't close as sibs earlier in life, all of a sudden come close together, maybe because of the caring of a parent, and vice versa. Some that were close, then one isn't caring as much as another, and it causes all this conflict. I don't know how to answer the question other than saying that we really need to examine relationship quality. The quantity isn't enough.
Thanks.
That was a short lecture. That was as short as it can get.
So we're almost finished for the first session. I first want to thank Andrew very much for a great presentation, very enjoyable. And Andrew will be around if you wanted to bend his ear. If you have a question you'd like to bring up, I'm sure you'd be open to that.
Yes,
Okay.
certainly.
What a bribe. But anyway, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks, David.